Booker? Yeah, that's pretty cool. Oh, thanks for recording it. So I'm gonna say it again. Welcome to the React Native Workshop. The checking code is here. It's React, but with a 3 and a 4. It's really creative, you know. And the link to the slides is right here. acmurl.com/react-native-slides. And the repository for some of the code examples are here as well. So I'll just give like a little bit of a second for people to look at this. It's also in the shared notes, I think. Yeah, so the link to the slides is in the shared notes. I would say these slides are pretty dope. If you hear some weird noises, it's because fan on my computer is like going crazy. I'm sorry about that. Just deal with it, I guess. Yeah. All right. Let's just move on. Hopefully everyone has a link to the slides. If not, go to the shared notes. All right. So why use React Native? So React Native is essentially this development system, right, that you can use to develop mobile applications using React components and JavaScript. So generally, it's easier to grasp, especially for people coming from web development, compared to like native Android or iOS. For example, you get all of the packages of like npm Node Package Manager. So a lot of the components and stuff you could reuse from that as well. And it's cross-platform. So rather than having to code like separate apps, for example, for iOS and Android, you can just build one code base and have it work on all platforms, theoretically. Obviously, there's like some like caveats to that, like native components and all that, but that's out of the scope of this workshop for now. So, you know, React Native doesn't actually suck that much as I say it does. But yeah. So what we're going to be building this workshop is just a basic calculator that adds numbers. So like, no, this is not a CSE 110 lab. This is like its own project. Don't worry about it. So we're going to have two inputs here. So you see this first number and this second number, and we're just going to output the sum, right? So it's pretty simple enough. This is using an emulator, but you're not going to need any of this with React Native, at least to start with. So you're not going to need like Android Studio or an Android like device or anything like that. It just works. So before we begin, I just want to say, if you have very little React knowledge, that's okay for this workshop. I'm just going to be going over like the different parts of React. It's obviously going to help if you do have more React knowledge, but hopefully you should be at least familiar with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because if not, then I think this workshop's going to be a little bit hard to follow. And you don't need any mobile development experience at all. So like writing Android with Java or writing iOS with Objective-C, is that the language? You don't need to know any of that. It's all done with JavaScript instead. And so these are the only things you need to install. Is we need Node.js down already, and any kind of text editor. Now you don't need to actually install these for the workshop right now, because we're going to have interactive coding segments throughout the workshop. But if you click on these, if you're following along on the slides, if you click these buttons here, they're going to take you to the website. Who just muted me? What? Anyway, let me go back.
Yeah, Tang wrecked you on accident.
Wow. I see how it is. Okay.
I'm already regretting it.
Wow, that's messed up. Alright, so hopefully, yeah, you don't need to install stuff. So, we have these little coding segments. This is kind of cool. I'm kind of proud of this. It's just like one React component that I like imported. But it's really cool, right? That you can just directly code in these slides. So like if you want to say something, like you want to modify the code, then like it's gonna render it here, which is kind of nice. So we're going to be using these to essentially demonstrate certain concepts and also offer some challenges for you to try. You can follow along using these, or you can just use, in the previous slide, you could install like Node.js and install VS Code and set up the project yourself and follow along there. So yeah. So right now I'm going to give a really very oversimplified like crash course of React. Obviously, like there's going to be like React is way more in depth in this and way more complicated. But for the purposes of this workshop, I'm just going to go over like the very basics that you need to know, and I'll explain stuff along the way if we do run into things that I didn't explain this way. So we're going to start with components, and that's essentially the building blocks of React. So everything in React is considered a component if it's not like a div. So basically we can nest components inside of each other, and this prevents a lot of code duplication, and you can reuse a lot of the code. So there's two ways to declare components. The first way is class-based. So if you've done object-oriented programming before in the past, you'll notice that this is very similar. So we're creating a new class called Hello World, and this is essentially the name of our component is Hello World, and we're extending React.component. So we're saying that Hello World is a type of component using OOD terms here. So Hello World extends React component, and then here we have this render function, and this render function is going to return our component that we actually want to render. So in this case, I just have two h1 tags and Hello World here. And moving on. So yeah, this is just zooming into this part. So that's the declaration of the component, and this is where the component actually gets rendered. Also, another thing to keep in mind is lifecycle methods. I forgot if these are like 100% correct, so they're not. I forgot if this component will not, the component did not. But these, you can basically run code. You can write code to run when a component gets mounted or created onto the page. Now, alternatively, you could also declare components functionally. So, functional methods or functional components. So this is using JavaScript's arrow notation. Another way to do this would be to write export default function instead. So this is saying that we have a function of no arguments, functional, Kyle. So we're saying that this is a function that has no arguments, it takes in no arguments, and this arrow simply goes to here, and this is the actual body of the function. And it's just going to return the component, hello world, right here. And you can't use lifecycle methods in functional components because they're, they don't have class. They're not a class, right? But you can sort of emulate this effect with React hooks and the effect hook. So use effect takes in a function. So you notice this. This is one way of declaring functions as an actual value or variable. So this function takes in no arguments. And you can write code here, and this is going to be essentially the same as component did mount. And when you return, you're going to return another function, and whatever code you write here is going to be the same as component did or will unmount. So, yeah, and use effect, you can use it with a lot more than just lifecycle, but we'll get into that later. And another strong suit of React is obviously component reuse. So if you want to, for example, write your own components, so here's an example. We created a component called another component, and we write this functionally. So it's a function that returns these h2 tags and saying goodbye world. And then we could just directly put it into our code here. So, is everyone good on like basic React components so far? Alright, I don't see any complaints in the chat, so I'm just gonna move on. So now I'm going to go over state and props. So these are some of the most powerful features of React, I would say. And they're used pretty much everywhere. It's a very important concept. Yes, I love React. Everyone loves React. So here's an example of props. So we're declaring another component again. And actually we're using this component here. So props example is going to is a function that takes in one argument called props. And we can access these props using this props.text or props. Whatever else that we want to pass in. And so here's a really simple example where we use props example, this component here, and we pass in text saying hello world. So now, essentially what we're going to do is, this code here is going to render h1 tags, and then it's going to render hello world as the actual content of the text. So it seems pretty easy enough. And you don't have to pass in static values here. You can also pass in like variables, for example, as props. You can do these. You can create these dynamically. So it's very interesting. How do you pass props from child to parent? I might have to Google that, but I think it's like lifting the state, if I remember correctly, or something like that. Ah, yeah. Yeah, so you would, so I guess what Stanley's saying is that you would pass in a function, right, as a prop, and then call that function from the child component. Yeah, it's actually a very interesting case. So it just shows like you can do a lot with just props alone. Yeah, I'm not a React expert, I'm not a front-end developer, so. Alright, so now we're going to be talking about state. So let's go back to this really simple functional component. So we have here just a function and it returns hello world. But we can use state hooks to essentially keep track of this value and change this value whenever we want to. So the way this syntax works is a little bit odd, I guess. So first we need to import the use state hook from React so that we can actually use it. And then what we need to do is actually declare our state hook. So this is a little bit of interesting notation here. I think Python has something similar to this where you declare like a tuple and assign it a value. So text here is our state variable, and setText is what we're going to call a mutator, or a function that allows us to change the value of text. And we're going to set it equal to useState, and then we'll pass in a default value here. So text is essentially a variable that's going to start out as a string called hello world. And we can use setText to change that value. And likewise, we can also have it displayed dynamically here. So now this component is going to display whatever value is in text. That's pretty neat, right? Now, if you want to, again, you could change the value of text using setText. So if you want to change it, for example, to goodbye world, then you can do that. And now the component is going to render and display goodbye world instead of hello world. And so React Native components are a little bit different from web components. That's because we're using native mobile-based components instead of web-based components. So here you can see some of the differences, right? Instead of div, we're going to use view, or scroll view if you want it to scroll. Instead of p, we're going to use text. Instead of input, we're going to use text input. So there's more on the React Native website if you want to take a look at that. But here are just some of the very basic ones. And also you can write your own native components if you want. So this is a little bit more of an advanced feature that Expo actually doesn't support. But if you want to, you can actually write code in Java or Objective-C and be able to create components natively and use those in your React Native apps. But that's kind of out of the scope of this workshop. So getting started. So first we're going to need to install Node.js first. So if you don't already have that from the previous slide, please do that. This is optional, by the way, for the workshop. It's just that if you want to set this up on your local machine, you can do that. And so you can install Expo using the command npm install -g expo-cli. So what this -g means is going to install it globally, so you can access this module anywhere on your machine, rather than in just the current repository that you're in, the current folder. Then you're going to initialize your project with expo init hello world. Hello world can be whatever you want to call your app. I think this is a pretty good name to start with, right? And then just type cd hello world to go into your project directory. So again, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. This is just for whoever wants to set this up on their local machine. So does anyone have any questions so far? Yeah, thanks. I think so too. Spend a lot of time on them. See, if you learn React, you can make slides just as good as these. What is that noise? Yeah, sorry, it's the computer fan. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah, MDX converts Markdown to this, but you can also use React components. That's what differentiates it from regular Markdown. So like the whole interactive code thing, that was a React component. Yeah. Expo. Some of the images are actually like regular like image tags and not like Markdown and whatnot, so definitely things we would do with this. It's very interesting. And also all the code transitions that you've been seeing, that's all done with React. It's just a React component that I downloaded. Alright, I guess if there's no more questions, is anyone actually like doing this, by the way? Like the local machine stuff? I'm just curious. Okay. Alright, I guess let's move on. So this is just more local stuff that you could do. So running your app, just use the command yarn start here, and you should see a browser window pop up. So just download the Expo app on your phone, and then scan the QR code that comes up. So I can actually give a demo of this real quick. Let me just pull up Visual Studio. I know you guys can't see it, but I'm just going to show you what the interface looks like. So, Okay, so this is what the interface actually looks like if you're doing this locally. You notice you have this QR code here. You can actually scan this with your phone if you have the Expo app and run the app on your phone to test it. Very cool, actually. You can also run this in your web browser if you want to do that. So it might take a little bit of a while. Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is like, let's see if we expect, I don't know. Yeah, so this is actually what your app is. Kind of nice. You can run it directly in your web browser without having to use any emulators or install it on any devices. So that's kind of cool. I'm gonna close these now because my computer's probably getting louder. Is the fan noise like really loud? I'm sorry. Alright. So let's move on. So for now we'll be looking at this app.js file that we created if you're following along with the project creation process. So what does all this mean, right? There's all this code here. We're looking at this, and you see there's styles or whatever. What the heck is this? So this is your main component here. You notice this notation is a little bit different. It's not using arrow notation. It's just using export default. And we're just saying function, and we're calling it app, and it's not taking in any arguments. That makes sense. And then we're returning these elements here. So it's just a view containing just one text element here. And so this interesting part here is styles.container. This is another way of styling your components. Oh yeah, notice the native components instead of divs, which is different from web development. But there's another way of styling your components. So rather than declaring a CSS file, you can just write your styles directly in JavaScript. And this is a little more organized than writing it directly inline and having styles all over your code. Instead, you just put them all in one place here. So it's pretty similar to CSS. It's just done a little bit differently. So instead of semicolons, you're going to do commas instead. And instead of dashes, you're going to use camel case, meaning lowercase first and no space and then uppercase for each word. And then you're going to try to put all numbers or whatever in quotes. That's pretty simple. And you can declare as many of these as you want and then pass them in to your elements there to style your components. So as a bit of a challenge for people, I want you to try to recreate this layout using React Native. So there's this little Expo thing here that you can use to write your code. So just note that the 1 and 6 are text inputs and 7 is a text element. And then the plus and the equals are obviously just regular text elements. So I'll give 10-15 minutes for you guys to try to write this. You don't have to worry about styling for now, but if you want to, you can choose to style your components as well. Alright, so about 10-15 minutes. I'll just chill here for a bit.
Garrett, I was going to pause the recording when you're doing these interactive segments.
Okay.
When you watch the recording later, it you can cut
sure,
where
yeah.
you need to go and stuff.
That would make sense.
Keeps file size low, among other things.
On now. Hopefully everyone's doing okay. Thanks for starting the recording again. So here is the solution. So I'm going to break down each part of the solution to make sure you all understand what it all means. So, we're going to start with our text inputs. So we gave it a default value of 1 and 6, as you can see here. And we're just adding this little prop here, keyboard type equals number pad. This is optional, but this just makes it easier so we don't have to try to parse. Yeah, sorry about the popcorn, that's my fan. It's my computer fan. Anyway. So, number pad, this is optional because we just don't want to have to deal with like integer values when we parse our inputs eventually. So this just makes it easier. Style here, we're going to go into that later, but we created our own styles and we just passed them in through here. So it's pretty simple. So this next part here is our text elements. As you can see, we styled them all with text except for some. And this, pretty straightforward. We just put in what we want to show up here in between the start and the end tags. So that makes sense. Yeah, good comeback, Aaron. Thanks for that. So now, Firebase, maybe next time. You know, yeah, I'm kind of done with that. Okay, so this is the styles here. Again, this is pretty similar to CSS. So this is the name of our style. We call it whatever we want. Text input. I just have everything aligned to center because it makes sense. Let's see. I gave it an extra height, and then I increased the font size to 24, just to make it easier. But these are optional. They're not necessary to the functionality. They're just here for looks. And same for the text. We made the font size 24, and some we made font size 24 as well, and then we made the color green. Just because why not? You know, to differentiate it between the other two windows. Alright. So the next step is we're going to utilize React State to update our text. So we're going to be using the use state hook, and we're going to be creating state variables, 2 state variables actually, to keep track of the current values of the text fields. So as a bit of a hint, use onChange text prop in text input to run code in text unit. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of coding here. It might be too small to see, but what I mean by that is we're going to pass in a prop called onChange text, and it's going to break a bit. But then we're going to pass a function into this, and we're going to run our code here. So you would change the state here, for example. So I'll give like another few minutes for this. I'll turn off my mic again because fan is really loud. I'm sorry about that. So yeah, I'll just give like, I don't know, maybe another 5 to 10 minutes for this. It's only a few lines of code. Shouldn't be that bad. If you have any questions, feel free to tell me in the chats. Okay, recording is resumed. Alright. Thanks for the reminder, Casey. Alright, so we're just going to move on. So the solution to this challenge, here we go. So what we're going to do is create 2 separate state variables here. We're going to create 2 separate state variables called text field 1 and text field 2, and set the mutators here. So let's see. So using a state hook, we're just going to do this. Set the default value to be 0. Makes sense. And then here we're going to update the default value so that it now depends on the state, which makes sense. See ya, Aaron. Have fun. Alright, so Then we're going to add this little thing here, onChange text. So this little text element here, so it's going to take in one variable or one parameter called text, and this is essentially the new text that the text input now has. So we're going to have that, and then we're simply going to call this function here that we declared in the state variable called setTextField1, and we'll set it with the text. And we'll do the same thing for TextField2. So now we essentially have two different state variables that we're keeping track of. So at any time, if we want to, we can get the value of whatever is in each of these text fields. Alright, so now we have these values, right? So what are we going to do with them? So we're going to have to obviously calculate the sum, right? So we have to try to somehow get them both and add them together, and then also update the text on the screen that we're displaying. So a way to do that would be to use the effect hook. And this is one of the different use cases I was talking about before of the effect hook. So it doesn't necessarily depend, it's not necessarily only for component lifecycle. So for component like did mount, component will and mount, you can use it for more than that. So in this case, we're using this to essentially look at these two state variables, and we're going to run this code when these two change. Makes sense. And one reason why we have to do this, you might be thinking like you could probably technically just write it underneath this line, for example. But I believe set state, like setting the state, is actually asynchronous. So you might not actually get the proper updates. And you might run into issues with displaying and calculating, like parsing the text, for example. Asynchronous means that it essentially runs in a separate thread, and it will just run the next line of code without waiting for the previous line to finish. So you might end up calculating the wrong sum, for example, if you parse an older string, essentially. Well, yeah, you could think of it like that. So let's say you had set, let me go back here. Let's say you had set text field here, right? Let's say you had that. And then you had a different line of code underneath it. So if you call this function here, when this code gets run, it's going to just put this in a separate thread, and then it's going to immediately run the next line of code without waiting for this to finish. So if you use text field, if you use that value underneath somewhere in the code, it might not be the right value because we might not have updated it yet, because this piece of code might not have finished running. So does that make sense? Alright, cool. So anyway, back to the effect hook. So we're just going to write a function here, write some code here that will calculate the sum and also update the value. So that's essentially the next challenge. So I'll give you guys like 5-10 minutes for that. Yeah, so we have to convert the text fields to the numbers and we add them together. But how are we going to update the display? So I'll leave that for you guys to figure out. I'm going to mute my mic again because, yeah, the popcorn's burning. I know. Alright, so we're back. Yeah, the popcorn, the fryer, it's going on again. So I think we're going to get to the solution of this now. And this is essentially the final step to building your app. So this is the solution here. I'm going to go over each part of this that we just added. So first of all, we declare a new state variable called sum, and we declare the mutator called setSum. And we're going to start at 0. Does that make sense? Because our default values for these are 0, so we might as well set this to be 0, so it works. Then what we're going to do is in our effect hook, we're going to, first of all, parse the inputs, So these two are going to be integers. We parse them. And then we're just going to add them together. And then you're just going to update the state using setSum. So pretty simple, as you can see. But now we actually have to update the actual display. So the display of it is going to be down here. So this element here, we simply replace the 7 with this sum variable here. And this is just going to pull directly the value from the state variable sum. And this is going to update automatically because of the code we wrote up there. So I'm just going to give a final demo here. If you've been following along, congratulations, you just wrote your first React Native app. Or maybe, your second or whatever, if you've already done this before, that's fine. As you can see, we put in some numbers. So notice how if we have invalid inputs, since we didn't do any input checking, we're just going to get not a number here. And that's to be expected. If you wanted to, you can check if these are numbers, and then if they're not numbers, you can make them 0 or something, so this never happens. That's fine. We don't have to do that. So we're just going to go with some numbers here, 100, 138. And look at that. It adds together. It works. So that's kind of cool, I guess, right? It's a very simple calculator. So does anyone have any questions about what I went over? Currently frying pork chops. Yeah, next workshop, hopefully this is going to be gone. I'll try to figure out a way to deal with it. It's going to be my next workshop. So I'm thinking of hosting a Flutter workshop, actually. Maybe it might be a 2-parter. I don't know yet. The problem with Flutter is that you'll have to install Android Studio and Android SDK if you want to use Android development. And so that might be an issue because that is several gigabytes in size. Panda Express, yeah. Wait, who is I use Angular? I'm just curious. Because you're clearly lying. No one uses Angular. Come on. Yeah, Kotlin's pretty good too. That falls within the realm of native development. And actually, because Kotlin is pretty similar to Java. So that falls within the realm of native development for Android. And that's, I would say, much more complicated compared to this that we're doing, and even Flutter. Flutter's actually really nice. Alright, so we don't have any questions. I'm going to go over a little bit, just some caveats with Expo. It's a great tool to get started with, but it does limit you to using only React and React Native components. So let's say I don't know, your friend or something wrote this really cool Android component using Java. Well, you can't really use that if you're using Expo. That's the problem. So you can run the command npm run eject to eject your Expo app. And this would essentially turn it into a React Native CLI app. So the React Native command line interface is what you could use instead. But you're going to need Android Studio or Xcode, depending on which platform you want to develop for. So that is a bit of a hurdle to jump over, but this gives you much more flexibility in what components you can create, and also gives you the option of running native code, obviously. There's a more in-depth guide here, if you want to check it out. Click this. Go here, React Native quick start. Just pick your operating system what you want to develop, and then just follow these instructions. It's a little bit more complicated than setting up Expo. Obviously, you're going to need to install Android Studio and all that. It's going to take a while. But, yeah. Oh, what the frick happened here? Okay, well, I guess the layout just changed for no reason. That's great. So, that's pretty much it for this workshop. So, congratulations for building your first app if you've been following along. We have several more resources here. So you can check out the official React Native docs here, and more info about React hooks, which I've used quite extensively. So I guess I'll just stick around for a bit if anyone has any questions. But yeah, thank you all for coming. I hope to see you all in my next workshop, which is coming up next week or in 2 weeks. Bye bye. I'll turn off the popcorn. Alright, I'm gonna ship it to you guys.